This is a code walkthrough for the example file person.java, which pretty much represents our final iteration on this incremental development of our person class. This is the person phase 10 snapshot of our person class. And I want to go over just in brief how we'd go about testing this. But before we do that, let's look back over what we've created and sort of admire our handiwork a little bit here. Going from top to bottom, here's our instance variables, some constants for mutator data checking, a format specifier for height, weight, and BMI, and then we've got default, full, and alternate constructors. We've got a toString, a print, and an overloaded print. We've got an accessor, a mutator, and a prompting mutator for first name. And then we've got the same three methods for last name, birth date, gender, height, and weight. And remember that we've got some mutator data checking going on in the weight, height, and gender. And we've also got some safe object data transfer for the birth date. Then after all those accessors and mutators, we've got our equals method, our derived data accessors for age, IQ, and BMI, our utility methods for eat, exercise, and update, and then finally that brings us down here to our test code, which we've been putting together incrementally. And we've already seen this execute, so I'm not going to plow that same ground by going through this again in the debugger, but I just want to look back one last time at a general sequence of testing. Again, the preferred way is to add this incrementally as we add capability, but now we should probably go back and just review what we've done to test this. So remember, we had three constructors, so the idea is that we always want to test all of our constructor forms. So here's an object created with a default constructor, with a full constructor, and with our alternate constructor. Then what we're doing is we're printing out in this next section using both toString and print. We're printing out the starting states of these P1, P2, and P3 objects. Now once we've done that and we've checked that all of these starting states are correct, we can pick one of these objects and move forward with the testing. Remember, we don't have to test every method on every object. So we've just selected this P2 object for further scrutiny, and we're going to apply our future checks to that one. So here we're testing all of our accessors by simply getting out the instance variables and printing them out individually. Remember that this is one single variable, this is one single variable, so this is no different than you've been doing all semester long. Now we're going to test the regular mutators, so we're going to change all the instance variables up, and then as always we're going to print what our object looks like after making those changes. Then we're going to do the same thing with a set of prompting mutators, and here we're going to use scanner, the false mode, and again we're going to print out the state of the object after we're done. And notice how we've got all this blocked into different sections. We've got all these sections titled so we know what it is we're trying to test. We've got white space in here to kind of break things up a little bit. Here we're doing some exercise of the mutator data checking. We're going to try to set some of these values like gender, height, and weight to impermissible values. And we're also going to try to create a new object with those same impermissible values. And when we print the resulting object out, we should see that all these changes have been rejected and we're falling back to the standard default values. Here we're checking the object data transfer. We're setting up a new object, updating the birth date with this test date object, and then we're changing this test date object on the outside and reprinting our person object to make sure that these changes aren't manifested in the instance variable, the private instance variable internal to this P5 object. Next, we're testing equality, and remember there were three basic checks we should do. So we're checking whether an object is equal to another object of the same type, an object should be equal to itself, and an object compared to some other type of object, in this case a string, this should work, but it should always return a false result because we're comparing apples and bananas. And finally, we're checking our utility methods. So we'll print out the state of our object before making some changes. Then we'll apply one of the utility methods. Here we're eating 1,000 calories. And then we're going to print out the state of the object after to make sure that the weight, and by extension the BMI, have changed in the appropriate directions. Then again, we're going to make another change. We're going to exercise, and we'll print out the state of the object after making that change to see that the weight has correspondingly gone down. Finally, we're going to test the update method by setting up a brand new object, turning right around and updating all of its values, and then we're going to print out the object and make sure that all those changes held. This is, I'd say, a pretty full set of tests for our class, and the nice thing about having this inside the same file is if you make any changes or fixes to your class in this part of the code, you can always run it and it will scream through all of your tests, and you always have them to fall back on if you need to retest in the future. So get in the habit of adding this kind of test code to your components that you build, such as the one you should be building at this point, and leave that test code in there, and it should look something like this. And it might look like a lot, but if you build this test code as you add all these features, build a little, test a little, I think you'll find it's not too onerous to come up with a pretty good body of test code for your new user written classes.